Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Forum Focus. I'm Wyatt Sharpe. Our focus tonight, Travis Dhanraj and his testimony before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Dhanraj saying in that committee hearing, quote, CBC silenced me and intimidated me for simply trying to do my job and fulfill my public service role to Canadians. Dhanraj testified and went on to say that, quote, the tweet was not the beginning, it was the breaking point. For months prior, tensions had been building, not over performance, but over control. And of course, that tweet that he is referring to was directed at CBC President Catherine Tait. He went on to say that he was used as a, quote, symbol of progress in CBC's branding, and in his editorial independence was stripped away, and his access to political guests became centralized under specific gatekeepers, naming two people in particular, the host of Power and Politics, David Cochrane, and Rosemary Barton, as among those who had the ultimate authority over which politicians could appear on his program. And joining me now to discuss this in his first broadcast interview since leaving the CBC is Travis Dhanraj. Travis, thanks so much.
Hey, Wyatt. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, I just kind of want to start out. I tried to set the scene a little bit there for people, but for people who aren't super familiar, this all kind of started with a tweet that you put out directed to CBC President at the time, Catherine Tait, over some of the budget funding. You had requested her to come on your show. Walk us through kind of a timeline of events as best you can.
Sure. This is the thing, right? I came back to the CBC after I was at Global for several years as the Queen's Park Bureau Chief. And it was a very good role. I was, messaged by the editor-in-chief at CBC to encourage me to take on this role in Ottawa. So I did that, and ultimately I came back to Toronto, worked my way through a number of different positions, marketplace, etc., a national reporter in Toronto. And then they offered me my own primetime show. And initially, I didn't know if I wanted to do it because I was doing marketplace, and I thought, the work that I was doing there was strong investigative work. But I thought to myself, this kind of offer doesn't come along very often, a primetime show.
Right.
And it was pitched to me as being branded around me, around my strengths as a journalist. When you have a show, you think that there's a certain level of editorial input that you are going to have on the program. And slowly but surely, I started to see red flags, even in the development process. But that continued to build and build and build. But I pushed forward. In the first couple of months of the show, there were several issues. We had, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party on, Melissa Lantsman. I think you heard my testimony today, issues around that. But then there was the tweet incident. And that really kind of struck me as it's a point in time where I was like, okay, this is not just we're having editorial disputes here. This is a larger issue in terms of some of the things that are going on with the show. And I was taken off the air, as I outlined in the testimony today. I was put through a hellish disciplinary process, which there's documentation of, there's recordings of.
But Travis, sorry not to interrupt you, but can you just go, because for people who are watching, from the moment that you posted that tweet, I remember watching, and there was actually a moment on CBC where a guest had said to the fill-in anchor, "Where's Travis? Where's Travis? People want to know where Travis is." What actually, from the moment you posted that tweet to the moment you were taken off the air, did you get a phone call? Someone emailed you, said you're not? Take us through that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I put the tweet out, I think it was on a Thursday or a Wednesday. I would have to look back at the timeline. And, within 48 hours, 72 hours or whatever, it was a very short time period. I got a call from my boss, and she said, we've got a problem. And I had checked with my executive producer after I posted the tweet, and he said, oh yeah, you stated facts. I don't see a problem with that. And I also had people in the newsroom, colleagues, saying, good on you for calling her out, because, we need some transparency around the bonuses. So after that, I was told that there was going to be this disciplinary process and that I was not going to be allowed on the show. And I was also under a confidentiality agreement, and I couldn't discuss this with anyone. So I just disappeared. But really what was going on behind the scenes is that I was in these hours-long meetings where this was being litigated. We were forensically examining this very short tweet. And I was told that I put, it's unfortunate at the end, because she didn't do the interview, that was editorializing.
Hmm.
And I raised concerns throughout these meetings repeatedly that I have, you know, serious problems with the fact that we are in a meeting right now about a journalist posting a factual tweet
Hmm.
about the president of this organization. And now they're, basically in this disciplinary hearing. That is
Yeah.
shocking to me. It was shocking to me as a journalist. And it also sent a signal to other folks in the newsroom who didn't know exactly what was going on, but they had an idea. The tweet was up, then Travis was gone.
Hmm.
That you don't do that. You don't question senior executive leadership at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation if you want to keep
Right.
your job and you want to keep your face on the show that your face is branded on.
Yeah. All right. Some important things there. We're going to pick it up right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Forum Focus. I'm Wyatt Sharpe, joined once again by Travis Dhanraj. Travis, in your opening statement today, you talked a lot about the toxic workplace culture that was kind of within the CBC. And earlier today on your platform, Can't Be Censored, you aired another interview that your co host Carmen Wong did with another former CBC employee, Karen Johnson, who also was basically
Yeah.
forced out of the CBC. And I wonder because people have been trying to say that you are weaponizing this for political reasons. They've been trying to say that it's
Mhm.
an isolated incident. So I wonder what your response to that would be, and just kind of with the backdrop again of Karen Johnson and other employees who you even said in your testimony, current CBC employees who aren't willing to speak on the record yet, but it seems maybe might be eventually willing to.
I think it is fallen on partisan lines. Even today, I was hopeful by outlining some more of what had happened. It wouldn't, but it did. Even in the committee room, I was very disappointed that the Liberal members and the one Bloc member was there didn't take the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into some of the issues that I laid out. It was the Conservatives, and so I understand why this will look for some people like it is a partisan issue. And I'm looking at social media. I do read the comments, and there's folks on the left that do think that I want to tear down the CBC. I went in my testimony today into great detail in terms of how I have always believed in the need for a public broadcaster in a country as vast as ours, but it has gotten so far away from what it was meant to be, and it has become this polarizing force that I think there needs to be a major recalibration. So I can't control what that public narrative is, but from my perspective, I did not want to, as I said in the
Hmm.
testimony, I did not want to turn this into uh, all liberal show, an
Yeah.
all NDP show, an all conservative program. I wanted to have a diversity of opinions and perspectives. And the other thing, you mentioned the interview that we did today, Carmen did with Karen Johnson. It's shocking to me, but there are more stories like hers, and I outlined some of them at the beginning of the meeting. This is tokenism. The allegations that she's making are about tokenism.
Hmm.
The allegations that I, have made in committee and that they are going to be tested with the Canadian Human Rights Commission are about tokenism as well. I was branded as somebody who had a bold voice in journalism, that we presenting fresh perspective, and I was, essentially, my voice was diminished,
Hmm.
and it continued to be diminished over time, but it got fainter and fainter as the weeks and months on that program continued.
And you've mentioned some of the repercussions, if you want to call it that, that you faced for whether it be the Catherine Tait incident or other examples. But in your opening statement today, you also mentioned, and in some of the responses to questions, some of the other CBC hosts like David Cochrane, Rosemary Barton as well. I'm wondering, did those hosts face any kind of repercussions for their actions in the same way that you did?
I'm not going to comment on what is protected under parliamentary privilege, and there's a detailed account of individuals, senior members, that's outlined in the human rights
Hmm.
complaint. But I will say this, that there did seem to be a different set of rules for particular individuals, and I think that is something else that Karen Johnson highlighted. and it's something that has been highlighted to me in these personal testimonies. It was a bit emotional, I will tell you, reading some of these stories as they continue to come in. About a toxic workplace, about how these folks really tried to go through every single route that they could, follow the process, go to their manager, then escalate that to their manager, then go to the union, then file a grievance, then all of the things that they're supposed to be doing, and they just continued to hit roadblocks. And eventually, a lot of these people left. They were under a severe amount of stress. It, and the other thing I will say, Wyatt, is that this is not happening, from these accounts in one newsroom. This is a across the country, across the system issue. So if I am in Toronto experiencing this, and now there are stories about people who I've never met before that say your story resonates with me because this is exactly what happened to me in Vancouver. This is exactly what happened to me in this other region of the country. And they lay out in great detail and give me the emails and the receipts. There's a larger issue. It's a systemic issue.
All right, we're going to take another break, and Travis Dhanraj is going to come back after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm joined again by Travis Dhanraj. Travis, you mentioned this in your testimony, and this is something that, we've known each other before this kind of started and when you were the host of Canada Tonight. And when I would watch your show on CBC, I was amazed, and I'm not even just saying this in hindsight looking back, but I was amazed by just the diversity of perspectives and diversity of opinions. You showed in the committee today a photo of one of the panels that you did on your intersection panel on the CBC show with, I think it was like Rachel Gilmore and Stephen LeDrew and Raheem Maha. I mean, just like totally three different, very, very different perspectives and different opinions in terms of guests. But one thing that you also brought up in the committee was how there was certain actions taken to prevent you from interviewing specifically conservative voices on the program. I'm wondering, maybe, and again, you talked about this a little bit in the committee, but take us through kind of what that process was like, where you were told essentially that there was, as you said in the hearing, basically a list of people that you can't have on your show.
Yeah, I mean, I have the list, right? I mean, that's why I saw
Sorry,
CBC
can you
statement.
give I'm not going to ask you to name names of who's on the list necessarily, but like, was it commentators? Was it current politicians? Like, what was the source for this list?
Commentators and journalists. They were protected to be on only one program, and I mean, I can understand that. Okay, these folks are going to be on this show today,
Yeah.
and so we don't want them on the next show right after. But this blanket idea of you can never have anybody on your program that's on this list ever, it was surprising to me. And even, there was an example, this predates this, but I interviewed somebody right before the show after me did, and that became an issue. But that was a breaking news situation. This person was a newsmaker. We can't curate breaking news all of the time, right? So I think that there were a number of problems with that. And then the other thing that I highlighted today is the pay equity issue. And this is a big one, right? Because CBC is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you mentioned some of the folks I had on the panel. Well, there would be folks that are in those boxes on the television screen or sitting together on the couch, all contributing in the exact same way and all getting, some would be getting paid, some would not be getting paid. So there was definitely inequity. And I said to them, we have to rectify this. And instead, and I took this all the way to the DEI department. I said, we've got a problem because we're not paying contributors on these panels in an equitable way. And instead of fixing the issue, the panel was canceled. And so CBC is trying to create this narrative that these are all mistruths and mischaracterizations. I'll tell you why, the documents don't lie, the recordings don't lie. So they can double down as much as they would like to, but facts are facts.
And you mentioned in the testimony too that you had Melissa Landsman on your show, the deputy leader of the Conservatives, and there were repercussions for that too. And one thing that I've been kind of perplexed by, and we're gonna have to pick most of this up after the break, but maybe just quickly you can weigh in as it relates to the level of kind of repercussions that you faced for having a Conservative on. And I'll point out that many of the Conservatives who you had on your show were unwilling to go on some of the other CBC shows. Yours was kind of like it seemed the lone exception.
And I said to management, I said, we have an obligation as a public broadcaster to highlight all perspectives across the
Hmm.
network. Is it an issue that they don't want to go on particular programs? Sure, that should be dealt with, but that doesn't mean while that's being dealt with that they're basically not going to appear at all on the network except in clips. So it was basically funneling folks to a select group of individuals to be interviewed. And the other thing I said to them, Wyatt, is that, I have a very different lived experience than
Hmm.
some of the other folks that are on the network. And I think that that is valuable to have different hosts with different perspectives, different lived experiences interviewing people in positions of power. They did not see the value in that.
Hmm.
And so, that again goes to this facade of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when it came down to it, to actually make that a reality for folks, it really wasn't the case. It was window dressing, as I say.
Okay, we will be right back after this. We're going to take another break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm joined once more by Travis Dhanraj, former CBC News host, who, of course, wrapped up his testimony on Parliament Hill today. Travis, you were being questioned by one Conservative MP, Kerry Diott in particular, where he posed to you the kind of hypothetical situation, I guess, of if you were to have Pierre Poilievre on your show and kind of what would happen there. And you had said in response to that that you weren't even really allowed to pick up the phone and approach Pierre Poilievre to ask him. And one Conservative that did come on your show was Melissa Landsman, the deputy leader of the Conservatives, as we talked about before the break. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can just kind of take us through, because as I was saying before the break, Melissa Landsman is not someone who regularly goes on a variety of CBC shows. And it's because if you talk to Conservatives, they feel as if some of the CBC anchors, journalists, hosts are biased against them. Were there any kind of efforts to address that level of bias that the Conservatives, anyways, felt was present within the public broadcaster?
I mean, I don't know if they were trying to address it behind the scenes. There was a recognition that it was a problem. I mean,
Hmm.
I had two senior executives tell me that. There's evidence that they told me that yes, this is an issue.
Hmm.
We have to remember the timeline here as well. We were going into an election period,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's very important for an election period for Canadians to hear all perspectives. And I said, when there's a campaign, what are we going to do here with this policy?
Hmm.
I kept going to, oh, okay, well, we're going to review it. And then there allegedly was a review of the policy, and I said, okay, well, what's the take on it? We're sticking with it. I, I said, I feel like we're in contravention of our
Hmm.
mandate here, and this is a serious issue. So, the warnings that I gave were ignored. They framed this as coordination. It was not coordination. It was veto power. There's evidence that it was veto power repeatedly over and over again. Folks that I wanted to interview were outright blocked. And then when I did reach out, that became a point to put on a disciplinary letter.
Hmm.
Now, that's not usually how I had worked as a journalist. If I wanted to
Yeah.
pick up the phone, there wasn't a protocol written down
Yeah.
for how I, who I can call and when I can pick up the phone, and I have to go through 10 people to pick up the phone and make a phone call. It's
Right.
not really how newsrooms work, but it's how the CBC newsroom worked, and it's how Canada Tonight worked. So, I mean, it's just problematic on so many different levels, and this ultimately goes to, again, the issue of the toxic workplace, but also Canadians' trust, right? Because they are supposed to trust this institution. They're supposed to trust that they're getting all perspectives. And I said in the hearing today that when executives go to committee and they say, "Yeah, we got a couple of problems," they're gaslighting Canadians because
Right.
Canadians are not blind. They can see that there are major issues right now with the institution. That if we do want it to survive, we got to start fixing it.
Yeah. All right. We will leave it there. That's Travis Dhanraj. Thank you so much, Travis. I think everyone listening to the testimony today probably took something away. And I mean, I said this online too. I hope at least people are able to think about it, even if, because I think people obviously, and you've been subject to this, have been using you for political purposes and weaponizing what you've
Yeah.
said for political purposes. But I mean, I really don't think, speaking as a young journalist myself who thinks that multiple perspectives is a good thing, I don't think this should be a partisan thing. But as goes the political world, I guess. But thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it, Wyatt. And, I consider myself a former journalist now, but it does give me hope. There's not much hope that I have right now in terms of the industry because there's lots of problems. But,
Yeah.
a
Well,
young man
thank you.
like yourself doing the work that you're doing and having various perspectives, that's what we need. We need to pop these silos and these bubbles that we're in and actually have a real conversation where we can hear all sides of the issue.
All right. We will leave it there. That's Travis Dhanraj. Thanks so much for joining us tonight here on Forum Focus. We'll see you next week.